Welcome back to Research Methodology. Today I'm going to discuss another important topic, that is writing a research proposal. So first of all, let's look at a brief and simple definition of research proposal. A research proposal is a formal statement about what is to be studied, how it will actually be done, and what justification and importance does this research hold. Now, here, one thing that I must clarify before moving on is that a research proposal is not part of your thesis or dissertation. It is a document that is submitted to the relevant authorities to analyze and understand the importance and different aspects of the research that is being proposed by the researcher. This allows the authorities, whether it be the research committee or the department or the funding organization, to go through this document and understand what kind of research it's going to be. So this document is actually useful in multiple ways. It is helpful for the researcher himself, serving him as a map for his future research. Although a research proposal is not a final decision on the research, rather, it is just an initial statement in which the researcher, on the basis of whatever knowledge he has gained on this topic, informs the authorities about his topic of interest, his area of research, and how this particular research is going to be important and useful. And since this is a starting point for research, it does not include any detailed discussion on methods to be employed by the researcher while conducting this research. Although at this point he can only talk tentatively about many things which he might change his mind during the research as it progresses. And similarly, this research proposal does not have a lengthy literature review, because at this point, when the research has just started, relevant literature that is accessed and collected by the researcher might be too limited to allow him, to enable him to produce a lengthy literature review, nor it is the demand of a research proposal. So what we can sum up about a research proposal is, it is a brief document talking about the research, its nature, and its different important aspects. And there are actually two ways to write a proposal. The first is what we call pre-proposal data collecting. Now this is, you know, uh, a way that is adopted by a majority of researchers. And what it actually means is the researcher collects preliminary data and analyzes it before writing this proposal. And since he has this idea in mind that he wants to work on and turn into his elaborate research, he also talks about the design of his research, the methodology and structure that he will be giving to his research. So here he actually collects data and analyzes it before writing the proposal. And since he is doing this reading and analyzing activity, he can offer a tentative outline of the study, different subsections, different main ideas that he'll be including in that research. But since even after collecting this data and analyzing it, the researcher still needs a lot more time to access more data and study this subject comprehensively. At this point, he cannot offer any certain outcomes, any definite outcomes of the study, but he can only make educated guesses on the basis of his initial knowledge of the topic. He can anticipate what the outcomes of the study are going to be. The second way of writing a proposal is what we call speculative proposal. Now, speculative proposal is that the initial reading is still to be done by the researcher on the basis of his knowledge and familiarity with the particular area of study. He comes up with an idea that he wants to propose for detailed research. So he actually offers a rough guess about his study. He still has to spend time on the topic and around the topic to be familiar with more details. So these are the two ways, and the one that is more useful is the first one, in which the researcher has spent some time reading about the topic, collecting data and analyzing it, so that after this process, although he has not thoroughly studied the subject and he has not uh, conducted an exhaustive, detailed study of the topic, but despite that, on the basis of his preliminary reading, he is still confident enough to talk about the topic and offer a tentative outline about his research, because the purpose of the research proposal is basically and principally to add to the knowledge of authorities and help them understand the significance and direction of his research. And at different colleges, universities, or funding organizations, the format that is required can be different, and it is now up to the researcher. It is his responsibility to contact the relevant people and seek their advice and guidance about what kind of contents are expected of his proposal, so that he may work in compliance with their demands and expectations and produce a proposal that is not only acceptable but also fulfills all the requirements to attract their attention and seek their consent and approval, because this is uh, the ultimate purpose of writing this research proposal, to gain approval of the authorities and then start this research project officially and formally. Now, next thing that is most important about a research proposal is the very body of this document, what it looks like, what are its contents and components. So here I'll be talking about the most important components of a research proposal and its body, what it is composed of. Now first of all, let's talk about the title of. So first thing is the title of research. It should be short but explanatory. Now the title of the research should be driven by the research problem or problems that are to be investigated by the current research. So while choosing your title, you need to keep in mind your research problems, your research questions, because there should be a strong connection between your title and research problems. So your title, in other words, should reflect your main focus in this research. So what you can do is look at the key phrases in your research problem, in your research questions, and use them as the basis of your title. Now there is another phrase that we usually use while talking about the title of a research, that is working title. Now working title means an initial title that is chosen by the researcher for convenience, and then as the research moves forward and he explores this area in greater detail, he might change, rephrase, or sort of modify this title according to his findings. So this working title actually helps the researcher to get started. Another thing that must be observed while phrasing a title for research is the length, verb tense that is being used, format, complexity of phrase, whether the researcher is using a complete sentence or a sentence fragment. Now most of the time what is recommended is using a fragment instead of a complete sentence, most of the time. But sometimes the researchers do use a complete sentence, but that is quite rare. So the title, in simple words, should allow the reader to understand the focus, the central point of the research. The title should tell them what the research is all about, so that it might trigger their interest, or it might tell the reader whether they are interested in this research or not. So if the title is wisely phrased, it attracts the attention of the readers. The next thing is background, where you have to provide rationale for your research, justification, and the need for this research, how this research is important, useful, and what is the need for this research. So here This point can only be explained by the researcher if he has uh, done some initial reading and knows about the topic, the subject area, and what is already done on this topic. Only in that case he will be able to identify a gap in the pre-existing research, and by filling in that gap he will justify his research. Now, this justification and contribution aspect of research needs a detailed discussion, and on this I'll be talking in detail in my upcoming discussions. So, while talking about the background of research, the researcher has to demonstrate knowledge about this topic. He has to allow the reader to see how far he is familiar with the topic, how he has actually already explored it, so as to develop uh, confidence and trust in the reader about the validity and acceptability, reliability of this researcher's arguments. If he is scholarly, if he has already gathered enough knowledge about the topic, as readers, we are more likely to trust his argument and listen to him attentively. So, while talking about the background, the researcher is supposed to build on and add to the already available research on the topic. So, this will be his contribution, that he has actually extended the boundaries of this topic. He has added more to it, and this is what makes his research count. This is what makes his research valuable. Another thing that is to be included in a research proposal is research questions. Simply speaking, he has to mention different research questions which this study is going to investigate. So, if the researcher has studied this topic and he has gone through what is already written on it, he can be in a position to identify those areas which need further research, which need further investigation. So, in research questions, he has to talk about those points, those you know arguments in his research that he is going to elaborate, that he is going to explore. And then he certainly has to offer definition of key terms that he has used in his research. Now, it so happens sometimes that a person who is not very familiar with this topic, or whose knowledge about the topic is limited as compared to the knowledge of the researcher, he might be confused about certain terms that the researcher has used. So, in order to facilitate the understanding of the reader and make it more convenient for them to understand his arguments, he is supposed to define the terms, the key terms he has used in his research, so that uh, the work becomes self sufficient, not compelling and forcing the reader to look more information somewhere else. And providing definition of key terms also allows better understanding for the reader. He will not be confused. But if these terms are not defined and explained, there might be more than one meanings attached to a certain term, and it becomes uh, difficult and confusing for the reader to determine which meaning the writer is actually attaching to this term. in which sense he is using a certain phrase. So if it is explained by the researcher himself, the reader will find himself quite comfortable moving through the research and understand the ideas of the researcher more easily. Next, he has to talk about aims and objectives of the research. Now, aim is actually the overall driving force of research. In simple words, what you target to achieve, what your end product is going to be, is your aim. On the other hand, objectives are means to achieve those ends. So he has to talk about uh, what he thinks he will be able to achieve through this research and what means he wants to employ in order to achieve those ends. The next is certainly a brief discussion on methodology or methods. Why he has chosen a particular methodology and not some other. So he has to talk about not only the methodology he has chosen, but also the reason for going for this particular methodology and not for some other. Because uh, the question might arise in the mind of the reader, why did the researcher choose this particular methodology and not something else? And sometimes if while writing this research proposal, the researcher himself might be able to see that uh, the methodology he is choosing might not be as useful and relevant to his research. So he might change his mind. But if he does not consider this aspect altogether, chances are that the objection will come from the readers. And although the researcher always have the possibility, the opportunity to consult with his supervisor who might point out this deficiency in his research, it is very good if the researcher himself is conscious of different choices he is making during this research project. And then he has to provide details about samples, numbers of people to be contacted, method of data collection or methods of data analysis, and ethical considerations. So he has to talk about the sampling aspect of research, how he is going to conduct this research, what kind of people he is going to interview or approach during this quest for collecting of data. Similarly, he has to keep in mind that the proposed method should address the identified problem. So again, let me reiterate my point that I must have made before, that there should be sound coordination between method and the research problem. You should choose a method in accordance with the research problem, because only in that case the researcher will be able to find answers to his research questions. But if he chooses a method that is not suitable for his research questions, he might not be able to reach a correct conclusion, because this decision of this choice of method sometimes, rather always, produces different results. If you choose a different method, your findings will be different. So in simple words, in order to understand which method is most suitable, you need to again bear in mind your research questions. your research questions will allow you to determine the validity of a research method and its relevance. Next, uh, in a research proposal, you have to include table of contents, how you have organized your study initially. And here in table of contents, you will talk about different chapters of your research, what you are going to explore in chapter 1 and then in chapter 2, so on and so forth. So again, let me emphasize that a research proposal is just a preliminary discussion on your research, and you will be allowed by all means to change many of the contents, many of your ideas, many of your technical decisions during your research project as you investigate your topic and explore more and more ideas, and then somehow sometimes feel that a certain choice that you made is to be changed, needs to be changed, has to be changed. And next he has to talk about timetable, detailed timetable for all aspects of research. I mean, how much time he is going to spend on this project as a whole, and then he has to further divide this overall time considering different sections of his research and different aspects of it. For instance, how much time does he think he is going to spend on background research, how much time he needs to develop a questionnaire or an interview, how much time he needs to collect data, how much time he needs to analyze data and then report it. So all of these aspects of research must be considered, and the researcher must propose time in accordance with his research project. But there is a suggestion that must be followed by the researcher. If he thinks he needs, let's say, 4 months for the completion of this research project, he should give himself some extra time, because uh, sometimes unforeseen challenges and difficulties arise which make your uh, project and its timely completion very difficult and sometimes impossible. So instead of proposing 4 months, he can propose 5 months or 6 months. I mean, according to the time limit that he has. And talking about this timetable and the time that is required to conduct this project is necessary to allow the concerned authorities and all, as well as the researcher himself, to analyze how temporally realistic the proposal is. I mean, by looking at different sections of research and the time that the researcher has proposed for each section, the concerned authorities will be able to see whether this project can be completed in the proposed time limit, or the researcher needs more time for that. So, I mean, this is where not only the researcher but also the relevant authorities can decide if the research project is too ambitious for the time, it cannot be completed within the given time, or it is too limited and needs to be expanded. So both of these decisions can be taken by either of the two parties concerned. Next is the financial requirements of the project. The researcher has to talk about the budget and resources that he needs during this project. So this is very important, especially when the researcher is applying for a scholarship. So the funding body has to, see whether this research and the way the researcher is going to conduct it can be accomplished within the available resources. So he'll talk about the resources which are needed and how he is going to obtain them, how much money is needed, whether uh, he has to travel to different places, and how this traveling will be managed, because the funding body has to consider this financial aspect of research. They have to provide monetary assistance to the researcher. So if they think that this research can be completed using the amount of money or the resources which are being offered by the funding body, they can easily decide about how to accommodate the researcher. And then he has to decide upon a methodology in accordance with resources. So this financial aspect of research is very important when the researcher is applying for a scholarship. The next thing is dissemination, how the research is going to be publicized, how it is going to be shared. So this publicizing results and findings of research is an aspect that is equally important, because after the research is completed, I mean, it has to reach the concerned people, the target population, and the researcher has to consider how this aspect can be accomplished. For instance, for students mostly, after the completion of this research, he is supposed to provide a number of copies of thesis in the institution library. And depending on the kind of context you're working in, this dissemination process might differ. For instance, at a more advanced level, you might recommend that after the completion of this research, you will be writing an article talking about the findings of your research, or you might be delivering a lecture at a certain platform talking about your research and how you uh, explored that particular topic and what your findings are. The last thing where your research proposal ends is bibliography, or what you simply call references. So at the end of the proposal, you have to provide a list of relevant literature. And again, looking at this list, the examiners, who are certainly your supervisors, who are certainly experienced and knowledgeable, will be able to see how you are going to use these resources. So in simple words, you have to provide a list of references that you have found relevant to your topic and which you would be using for your discussion, for your analysis of the topic. And similarly, you will also include appendixes, extra sections providing some information about the topic or your research in general. And in appendixes, you might attach a chart or a table talking about some aspect of your research. Now, if you look at this discussion, I have just talked about the most important aspects of research proposal. and I'll be expecting you to uh, practically follow all these guidelines. And when you are assigned your term paper for a subject, you must be following these steps: reading and collecting data, analyzing it, and then compiling and organizing it to give it a proper shape for an academic assignment. So I hope this discussion will be useful for all of you. If you have any questions, you can contact me anytime. Thank you very much.